Um, all right. Hello, everyone. Um, um, I am live now, as of now. I just thought I would do my annual birthday live stream, which I do almost every year, and it's going to be just a rather casual event where you can just ask me questions. Um, I, I've just turned 29, as you know, a few days ago. And well, I kind of have mixed feelings about turning 29 because on one hand, it doesn't feel that long ago that I was 25, 26, and and it just seems like time flies by. And it's not that I think that I'm old per se at this point, but more that I can that it seems like sometimes because my life 10 years ago because my life 10 years ago was relatively the same, that it seems like 10 years from now, I don't see why my life would be any different. Of course, I have grown a lot as a writer in that respect, in terms of my skills as a writer. In fact, when it comes to the things that I have direct control over, I've actually grown quite a lot in that respect. But when it comes to things like financial security, not so much because I could put a book out and hope it does well, but at the end of the day, I don't have any control over that other than letting people know that my book indeed exists. And so that can give me some anxiety. And so it's not that I think that I'm older when I'm 29, but I can definitely see so-called old age coming. So of course, old is relative, really. Um, even at 40 nowadays, someone is relatively young. But sometimes we have this idea in our head that by a certain time we should have accomplished this. We should have a marriage. We should have this or have that. And if we don't reach it, then sometimes we can feel a bit disappointed. Like for example, I thought that if I didn't have my life figured out by the time that I was 26, that would be so horrible. But here I am, 29, and and my life is still relatively the same. Although I didn't predict that I would be living in the same house a few years ago. Yeah, too old. Yeah, I'm 31. I still don't feel too old. Abraham was 80 when he got popping. Well, yeah, that is true. Some people, my point of contention is that it feels like that I'm. Sometimes it can feel like that I will never have, be financially independent and or that I will never achieve. When it comes to be old age, for example, it's not so much the age itself that I worry about, although technically speaking, every year you age, the closer you are to death in that sense. But it's more that I feel like I won't have that that I'll never have, let's say, find companionship in terms of like a wife, or I'll never have financial security, or at the very least, I won't get those things until I'm old enough that I might not be able to appreciate them. If it happens when I'm, let's say, 60, 70, or something like that. And so those things can worry me, especially because I don't see how my life could possibly especially because I don't see how my life could possibly change. I don't see how that could come about. Um, yeah, it's paycheck to paycheck. Well, at least you have a paycheck. I don't have a steady income at all. Like I've made, several $100s from writing, but then that eats away very quickly. And I just got a $300 from a small inheritance. After my grandfather passed away, and I'm going to put some of that in savings and use some of it as spending money. But yeah, that's why I can be very tight with money because I don't know when or if I'll get more money. The thing is with writing is that you could have, let's say, a great payday one month and then receive nothing the next. And so it's especially difficult with Amazon because when I make money on Amazon, I have to wait 2 months 2 months in order to receive that payment. And so it can be very frustrating for those reasons. And so because I just never know when or if I'm going to get more money. And so and that can be very discomforting. I would rather, when it comes to that, I would rather receive small payments consistently than I could rely on than receive a lot of money at once. Because if I receive a lot of small payments consistently, at least then I can be comforted in that sense. Yeah, I'm 35. Lots of writers didn't start until middle age. I was reading Kami's book on writing yesterday, and he discussed the financial instability of writing. Well, yeah, it's not it's definitely not a profession that one goes into if they are primarily interested in money. One goes into to writing because they love the work. There are so many easier ways to make money. Again, it's not so much about like with me. I have no desire. I mean, it would be nice, but I don't care really if I become a millionaire writer or anything like that. But I would like to make enough money that I could have be independent, be financially independent, and I don't have to without having to either rely on other people or having to work some dead end corporate job, you know, and it just doesn't seem like at the rate I'm going now that such a thing will ever happen or that I would have any control over it. And so, but again, it could. I'm just saying is that I don't see how possibly how it could happen. I don't see any scenario in which such a thing could happen, um, unless something just happens weird, oddly, where something goes viral and somehow I get a bunch of sales. Um, but that doesn't seem likely. Um, but then again, I never thought that I would be making the money that I have now. Like, you know, a lot of time I will sell it a lot often very 2 or 3 books a month, although I haven't sold anything this month. But a few years ago, I didn't even think that was possible. So who knows? Have you ever thought of writing a children's book? Well, I've thought about it. Actually, you might be surprised by that. But I thought about perhaps but it's one of those things where I don't know if I would be motivated enough to do it unless I myself had a child. Then I might be motivated because they would give me inspiration, and I think I would maybe write something, maybe if I could work with an illustrator, that might be a good idea, that something kind of like The Wizard of Oz, something that where I would still want to be poetic in the language, but I would make the language a lot simple, something that a child can understand, but it can still be poetic on, on a simplistic level. And so, but something like The Wizard of Oz, I could definitely see myself. But I don't know if I would ever do anything like that unless I had a child of my own where that could give me inspiration. I don't think I would write a children's book unless something like that happened. And and so again, that's another thing is that I sometimes I wonder, will I ever as we age, will I ever, find a wife? Will I, or at least, a wife especially who would understand me and not just a woman. I'm sure I could find someone if I just wanted to get married at all costs. That's not what I want. It's I want someone who will understand me and who I can relate to on that level, and that seems impossible given my current situation. I could go into it further, but it would require a very long-winded explanation. but And a happy birthday. Think outside the box. You can still do it. Well, thank you. I try all the time. Um, well, does anybody else have any questions for me? I can answer any questions about writing books, anything like that. Of course, I've been looking over my I bring them over here. Um, I've been looking over my book, Silent Reckoning, which has, I think, one of the best looking covers, which kind of looks similar to the Great Gatsby in terms of the cover design and in terms of it having the eyes that overlook the city. And technically, this is the eyes are supposed to be of the character. Jeannie Anderson and how her soul is overlooking the city, and the buildings behind are of the 1920s skyline, and so that's a very interesting cover. Um, I don't read books, but I listen to them. Do you have stuff on Audible? No, I don't have anything. I have stuff available in paperback, hardback, and um, as a digital ebook. Although I didn't have stuff available digitally for a while. But no, I don't have anything available in Audible, mainly because uh, I haven't narrated anything because it'd be very difficult to put together a narration, and also I'm not too sure how well I could narrate dialogue, especially if you have to like do like female characters where you go hi blah 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 like I don't think I would be the best at that. I can narrate narration fine, but when it comes to characters, I don't know if I would do the best job. And you'd probably need to hire someone, which I can't really afford to do. So maybe someday, but I don't think I'm going to have anything available on Audible anytime soon. You can listen to me, of course, reading passages from my books on the my channel. That's the way that I promote my work. But I don't have anything available on Audible at this time. Again, you can get my books on Kindle. You can get them um, on paperback and hardback. This is the hardback. Which, by the way, though, one thing I will say is that Silent Reckoning and all of my books really need more reviews. They are, the only one that has, a substantial amount of reviews is Empty Sounds of the Wind. The other books don't. And I, I've heard from several people, plenty of people who say, I love Silent Reckoning, and I say, okay, well, if you've read it, review it, and then then hardly anyone ever does, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. All you have to do is just say, I liked it would suffice. Even that would be helpful. Now, obviously, I would prefer a long, in-depth explanation for why you liked it, but even just an "I liked it" 5 stars, that even that would be helpful, um, and be highly motivating for me. But it's so hard to get reviews. It's harder to get reviews um, in some respect than it is to get a sale. You can get a sale before you can get a review. So well, let me see. Does anybody else have any questions for me? Any at all? You can ask me questions about writing, reading, what I'm reading, anything like that. Because I don't, I didn't plan for what to say. It's just this is just kind of a free flow kind of live stream. Of course, I always get kind of nervous when I do live streams because I can't edit out anything that I say, or anything like that. It's just completely freestyle, so you get mistakes and all. Um, so and this is basically just a way to hang out and just ask questions and all of that. I really have anything planned. Sometime I might do how long do you take to write a book? Do you write only one at a time or have multiple things you work on at the same time? Well, it can depend. It took me, believe it or not, around 2 years to write the rough draft of the Ecstasy and Ignominy, and I'm still working. I'm still my latest book, and I'm still working on the final draft. Hopefully, it will be published sometime in maybe June or July, maybe a little bit later than that. I don't see it coming out any earlier than June or July. But like I started the Ecstasy of Ignominy in April of 2022, and I didn't finish the rough draft until December 2023, and so that's nearly 2 years. And so, but that was a very long, epic book, and it's going to be my longest work to date. It took me around a year to write Silent Reckoning. To write a short novella, it takes me usually around like something like Empty Sounds of the Wind or The Mournful Wanderer or Symphony of Perdition. That takes me more around like 3 to 6 months. So it really depends on how long the work is. So it can vary. Any I would like to write a work again where where I can write it complete it within 3 to 6 months because writing a book that takes 2 years, like this came out in 2022. I haven't released a book since then. Hopefully, the Ecstasy and the Ignominy will come out this year. But I would like to write a shorter work that takes me 3 to 6 months because that's less taxing mentally, and probably my next project will be something of that caliber. Um, um, well, what inspired you to be a writer? Well, the thing is that a lot of things, but mainly classic literature inspired me to be a writer. Things reading, for example, Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens, writers, Shakespeare, writers especially who had a gift with language, with exploring the aesthetics of language, the aesthetic beauty of language, and I love creating poetry and beauty with words, and that's something because I can't draw, I can't really do it with images, but I can do it with words, and that just brings me a lot of satisfaction. I write I write commercial stuff for work, but I'm trying to return to fiction writing in February and March. Um, well, well, again, I'm probably going to take it easier this year when it comes to writing fiction because I wrote tirelessly last year, almost every single day, 3 2 3 hours a day, 6 days a week for nearly a year. And so I'm probably, what I'm doing now is I'm editing my book and getting it ready for publication. And then I may start, a smaller project later in the year. But I'm kind of just taking a break right now. In fact, I haven't even been reading a whole lot because lately, mainly because the editing can be so taxing on my mind that sometimes if I read a lot as well outside because I'm staring at a screen looking at words that sometimes I don't think I would have the mental energy to do as much editing. So I'm trying to because as some of you know, I wrote my notebook by my story by hand, and therefore I'm having to type it into the computer. I still haven't gotten it all in yet. I'm about maybe three-quarters of the way there on chapter 26, and there's 43 chapters. So hopefully I'll be able so I haven't really been reading a whole lot because I've been trying to get it all down. Hopefully I will return to reading once I get a rough edit of the book and I can then return turn it over to beta readers, then I can return and get a lot of reading done hopefully. What are your favorite works by Poe? Well, probably my favorite is the Fall of the House of Usher. That is such a great book, a really great book. It's I mean not a great book, a great short story because it has such atmosphere. So it has a lot of atmosphere. It has a sense of foreboding, a sense of doom. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. You have Roderick Usher and his sister Madeline Usher, and how Madeline is dying, and you think you it implies the story implies that you might even have there might even be incest going on here in the house, and how and then of course I'll spoil it if you haven't read it, but then he buries Madeline alive. She comes out, and then they she tries to strangle Roderick, and they fall down, and the house collapses, and it's kind of like it has this sense that the house itself is alive, that evil exists tangibly as a force. So I really love that one. The Telltale Heart is another one that I really love. Even though it's not as poetic as some of the others, where he kills an old man who has the vulturous eye, and then he goes mad. That was probably the first Poe story that I read, or the Annabel Lee, which is about a man mourning his lost love. That was a poem that was published after Poe's death. Actually, he it was posted in a magazine after he had died. He had written it beforehand, and that one's underrated. Personally, I think it is better, Annabel Lee, even though it's shorter than The Raven, which is another poem that I like, but it is kind of hokey, which I think is one of the reasons why it became kind of popular on a mass scale. Whereas Annabel Lee just has so much more resonance and depth to it. therefore, I definitely prefer Annabelle Lee, and there are so many others. The Mask of the Red Death. That's another one that I enjoy, where you have this prince, I think Prospero, I think his name is, where he's throwing a party, and then you have the Red Death, who's this someone dressed in red. He commands the nobles to not wear red, except because there's the Red Death going on in the countryside, and the nobles think they're safe in the house with Prospero. The Red Death won't get them, but then someone comes dressed in red, and they don't know who it is. But as he passes by, the people start dying because he is the plague itself manifesting in human form. So that's a great short story as well. And there are just so many great ones. I could probably think of more if I sat here for a minute, but there's also this one where this guy I read that one more recently where he like buries his wife. He buries his wife, and then he goes alive, and then he goes into her grave so he can steal her teeth. That's kind of, I forget the name of that one, but it's pretty grotesque. Or you have the Black Cat, where a guy mur- the Black Cat, where the guy um, murders his wife and then locks her up. I mean, then buries her corpse in a wall, and then and then when the police come to inspect it, they hear a cat sound because the cat's been buried in the wall with the corpse. So that's a great one. The premature burial, yeah, it's been a while since I've read the premature burial, so I can't actually remember a lot about it. I've read it, but it's been a long time, so I'll have to. I can't really comment on that one because it's been a while since I've actually read it. I mean, I know it's about someone being buried alive, but um, oh, hello, Christina. Happy New Year, my friend. Oh, it's good to see you. Christina comments on quite a few of my videos, and I'm very grateful for that. So I just thought I would personally tell you thank you while you're here. And so yeah, there are a lot of great post stories. Um, oh, thank you. I of course I'm glad that you can appreciate the content. I try to post at least when it comes to content, for example, I try to post at least 2 videos a day. I don't always do so. Sometimes I may go 2 or 3 days without posting because life keeps up with me. I try to post usually a video where I talk about writing or reading, or sometimes I'll talk about my thoughts on the arts or culture in general, or sometimes occasionally my personal life, although I try not to. And then I'll post a video where I give a reading or talk about one of my works, and that's usually more of a promotional tool. And so that's the content cycle. Of course, hopefully later this year, I hope to give a lecture on writing, an update on the lecture that I posted in 2022, because I'll be using a lot of material from my new book in order to expound further on my theories about writing and all of that. So stay tuned for that. That will be posted probably sometime later this year. Um, so does anybody else have any one thing I'll mention is that the fact that I love, and I've been watching lately, Roger Corman's Poe films, like The Fall of the House of Usher. That's a great film, and The Mask of the Red Death, and with Vincent Price. Those films are very good, especially The Fall of the House of Usher. Um, Corman was able to capture Poe's spirit very well and expound on the short stories, because, as some of you realize, the Poe stories aren't that long. So what Corman would do is that he would expand on the characters or add characters, and then the short story would essentially be the third act. And I think that worked very well. Um, so, does anyone else have any questions for me? I'll be glad to answer as long as people are willing to ask, at least for the next 2 or 3 hours. Oh yeah, yeah. The Pit and the Pendulum was an excellent Corman adaptation. In that version, though, you have if I can recall correctly, is that you have Vincent Price, who he's driven insane because he thinks he buried his wife alive, even though he didn't, and basically his wife and his doctor are in on a scheme in order to basically take his money, and but then Vincent Price ends up going insane at the end, and yeah, that's a very well made film. Yeah, I just bought the Poe collection recently of Vincent Price films. The Mask of the Red Death, though, which I only saw recently, is actually very the is a very good film, especially because it has what you might. It's about like these Prospero, and this is a Satan worshiper, and you have these people who are um, yeah, and you have these people who worship Satan because they think that will keep the Red Death away. And you have Hazel Court in the film, who was best known for playing Elizabeth in the Hammer film Curse of Frankenstein, but in this she plays someone who wants to basically wed herself to Satan, and then so she marks herself with an upside down cross, and and so that was a very effective scene, and it had a lot of things that were censored in the 1960s, but then it was put back in later, and so Hazel Court gave a very good performance in that. My favorite I remember those, I used to love to watch them. My favorite as a kid was The Raven. Yeah, The Raven is a film. It's um it's a lighter film starring Vincent Price, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre. I've only seen that one once because it was more of a lighthearted comedy. I'll have to watch it again. Hazel Court is also in that, I believe. Um, but yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that. But what is your favorite story from ancient antiquity? That's an interesting question. My favorite story from ancient antiquity. That would probably be maybe the Odyssey, or I haven't read a lot of the Iliad yet, but I'm very much interested in ancient Greek mythology in literature, especially because the Greeks were in many ways the first to invent or at least expound upon poetry. So there's a lot of aesthetic merit in ancient Greek literature, especially in the Odyssey. Of course, we have to read English translations, and that's one of the reasons why I'm probably going to set my next epic book possibly um, in um, in Rome. In ancient Rome, you might say, well, why ancient Greece? Well, because I wanted to combine, let's say, pagan societies with Christianity, and how Christianity ultimately dominated. So it's easier to do that with Rome than it is with Greece. But there was a similar, although differences as well, like culture and aesthetics. And so my next book may be an epic about ancient Rome, in a similar vein as something like Ben Hur, possibly. Again, it might not be. I may change my mind. I may come up with another idea, but that's what I'm thinking about at this time. And so no, I love the Odyssey, and I've been planning on reading the for more ancient literature from Rome, but I haven't as of yet. But okay, what is your favorite among the great actors? Christopher Lee, Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, Karloff. Well, I could go on about that forever because I love those films so much that they give me so much joy, and I almost find a comfort in watching them. Of course, among Karloff's films, of course, you have the original Frankenstein films, especially the first three. You have Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, and those films are just they provide a lot of nostalgia and a lot of comfort for me because I saw them when I was very young, and they have a certain kind of gothic atmosphere that's almost dreamlike that you can really get into. And of course, I wouldn't discount Lugosi though. Bela Lugosi in something like Dracula, he had a certain kind of presence that was just kind of spellbinding. And even though the movie itself isn't accurate, it has this haunting eeriness, especially because there isn't any music in the film. That is very intriguing. And among Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, well, I love again the Hammer Dracula films. They took the kind of gothic atmosphere of the 30s, but expounded upon it with more blood and a kind of heightened sense of forbidden sexuality that permeates those films, and especially the Frankenstein films, the Peter Cushing Frankenstein films, were very unique um, because Peter Cushing played an evil doctor. You know, he was more evil than the monsters he created, and so it was interesting to see him manipulate and control other people in order to get his work done. He was basically a sociopath in many ways. And the only one I haven't seen as of yet is the Frankenstein creates a woman. I haven't seen that one. That's the only one I haven't seen and need to see. Um, but I've seen all the others at this point, and because the Hammer films can be difficult to find because they're so they're not owned by one company, so they're very fragmented. And but you have Peter Cushing, who is basically in the film, in the film as Dr. Frankenstein was a sociopath, and you wanted to see him at many times get just ripped apart, and he did several times, but he was never definitively killed off. He always came back or would die in a fire, or in the first film, for example, where you see him going to a guillotine, but then you don't actually see him executed, and he comes back in the next film. And that started really a whole Gothic movement that lasted really from 1957 with Curse of Frankenstein, and then ended in 1974 with the last Frankenstein film, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. And all between there, you had various Gothic films being made. In Britain, it was the Hammer films. In America, it was the film starring Vincent Price, the films. You had some crossover as well, but I also don't wanna I also wanna say, though, that I just really love the Universal monsters as well, especially certain films like, for example, when Karloff played the Mummy, that was a very atmospheric performance. He gave a very, haunting performance about, a monster who longs for his lost love, in this case, Zeta Johann, and how, it has the element of reincarnation of a monster coming back to claim his lost love, and there's a sense of gothic romance about it, and of course you have someone like Edward Van Sloan, who was very underrated himself, who was the guy who always played the hero trying to combat the evil. There's a very strong sense in those films of good versus evil, without being hokey about it, and then of course the whole idea of a monster trying to resurrect his lost love, um, that again, of course, went on in films and TV shows like the later iteration of the Mummy, and even something like Dark Shadows, where you have Barnabas Collins who's trying to bring back the lost Josette and all of that. And of course, what I really love about the Mummy is that it was able to combine Gothic horror and ancient Egypt in a way that was very fascinating, especially with the black and white cinematography. Do you use beta readers? Well, yes, I do in a sense. I don't use beta readers in the sense that I send my manuscript to people through emails or things like that. What I do is that when I have a rough edit of my book, I will post a book my book on Booksy on this website where people can read and comment on other writers' work, and then I will try to get as many comments as possible there. And sometimes Booksy has been helpful in the past. Sometimes it hasn't. Sometimes I can get a lot of comments on a story. Other times I can't. Um, Very quite often on Booksy, people will comment on the first chapter, leave a lot of really good feedback, but then they won't read the rest of the book. It's very difficult to get people to read the rest of the book. They'll read the first few chapters, and even if it seems like they love it, they won't come back. It's very difficult to get people to come back. But I have gotten some very worthwhile feedback. People on Booksy, in my experience, have usually been very nice, kind, and generous with their time. I've met some lovely people on there who have given me some really great feedback. Of course, I don't feel under any obligation to accept any to change my work based on any criticism. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I don't know how Booksy is going to be when I do it again, though, because it's been several years since I've been on there. So sometimes one of the things I've noticed about Booksy over the years is that you get I'm seeing less and less people who stay on there regularly or or post regularly. I see more and more people who will who will make an account, be on there for a few days, and then leave. So one of my frustrations is that there are some people who I know give really great feedback, but then when I try to find them again, a year or so later, usually that they haven't uh, po- they're no longer on the website, and so that can be very frustrating. So Booksy is a very mixed bag. I've kind of contemplated whether I should do it at all because last time nobody read my book Silent Reckoning to the very end. They comment on the very first chapters, but nobody made it to the end. So I don't even know if it would be worth posting my story on Booksy this time. We'll see. I probably will, but if I find that I don't that I'm not I usually leave a story up on Booksy around 3 or 4 months before I publish a book to give people enough time to read the book and all of that. But if I find that I'm not getting any interaction during the first month, I might just pull it. Although I have had times where I pulled out early and then people showed up and wanted to read the book, and I was like, oh, but should have been here sooner. But yeah, Booksy has been helpful in the past, but it just depends. It's kind of a tradition now, though, when publishing books for me to post a book on Booksy prior to publication. Um, so now I'll move on to the next question. I find Christopher Lee and Cushing's friendship immensely touching. Two amazing gentlemen as well. Yeah, they um, they had a very touching friendship in the sense that for example, Peter Cushing was very much into Looney Tunes cartoons, and occasionally they would get together and laugh at. Especially that happened after Peter Cushing's wife died, I believe, where Christopher Lee cheered Peter Cushing up by taking them and seeing Looney Tunes cartoons, and so that was very funny. I just adore the atmosphere of the Harmer films. It reminds me of childhood when British television was filled with 60s, 70s shows slash films. Um, yeah, there used to be a lot of there's something especially about the aesthetic of a lot of period pieces between, let's say, the 60s through like early mid 80s that was that there's something about that aesthetic that I really like because you had a certain amount of grain on the cameras and things that made things seem very real. And a lot of times in period films nowadays, everything looks too clean and touched up, and so there was something about the grain and the atmosphere, and also just certain actors and like one actress who was in a lot of period pieces and not horror films per se that I really like is Susanna York, to the point where I actually made the character based in terms of looks the character of Catherine Harris in my latest book off her, and because she had other than having just a very alluring gaze and presence, she also had just a very haunting voice, a very one could call almost poetic musical voice. And so I based the character, the main character in my most recent book off her. Um, you should consider writing a mummy slash story slash novel in the modern era. I think I can only think of Anne Rice having written a classic mummy story. Well, I've actually thought about that. If I did, though, it probably I thought about creating a story. In fact, I thought about a story like this when I was very young, maybe 5 years old. Of course, it would be more sophisticated now about about these guys who find, let's say, who disturb a mummy, treasure or something like that. Then they go back to America in the 1930s, and then the mummy slowly, stalks them or something like that. And also, that this mummy won't be a mindless killer like Taurus, like who goes around and fat Lon Chaney Jr. Who goes around trying to kill people, and even when people trip and fall, he's slow, but then they trip and fall, and he's right there. But I don't want to not Lon Chaney Jr. He was an excellent actor, but I, but he was comical as Karras, though great as the Wolfman. However, um, um, I love the Wolfman remake with Emily Blunt and what's his name Del Toro or whatever. I think yes, it went a little too heavy on the special effects. Had a lot of great gothic atmosphere, and I thought Hugo Weaving was also really good in it. Um, yeah, and so I think I've answered everything there. Um, does anyone have any more questions for me? That regard, and you can ask me about my books, my writing, um, anything at all. I'm glad that you've I'm glad that that especially you bought all the books. Have um that you've mentioned the Hammer horror films and the classic horror films because I love talking about that. I could talk about that, for a long time. Um, I saw in one of your videos you referenced H.P. Lovecraft. Well, I mentioned H.P. Lovecraft because I know a little bit biography about his life. I haven't actually read a lot of his work though, so I can't actually comment per se. I know a little about like I've watched some certain documentaries about him, but I can't really comment because I don't really know a lot about his work per se. I mentioned him because he was a struggling writer who died young, but I haven't read a lot of his work per se. Um, what are your favorite lines of all time of your works? Well, there are a lot, and of course, I don't have them all written down with me. So and a lot of times, like I can remember the passages in my books and where they're at. I mean, and where they're at, but I can't always quote a line verbatim. I have to look it up. I can paraphrase it, but I can't like probably my favorite line in Silent Reckoning or my favorite passage that is if I can find it. There's a lot of great stuff in chapter 15. Um, let me see if I can find it here. Um, like I really love this passage. This might be my favorite passage in the book. Stepping into the lonely vacuity of my living room, all was suddenly silent. Back and forth, the chandelier dolefully undulated, aroused by the lucrative tremors of my toes. Draped in curtains of velvety opulence, the rectangular configurations of glass invited the glow of the city into the mortuary of hapless clarities. Somewhat resembling manifestations of creamy snow, the flurries of pale gray enshrined their beauteous ornaments upon my crescent lips, and for a moment it almost seemed as if I had become a living incarnation of moonlight. Now, I really love that passage because one of the ways to create a really vivid image is to is to give is to give humans nature-like characteristics, metaphorically and through personification. So, for example, if you describe someone being like, the beauty of the moon, for example, that can create a very potent and powerful image. Just as if you give human beings I mean, just as if you give nature human being-like characteristics, that can also create a very powerful image. So, for example, if you say, for example, the wind embraced me, well, obviously, literally, wind can embrace, but by giving nature human-like characteristics or giving humans nature-like characteristics, that creates a far more powerful image. If you can take, for example, two beautiful elements and then combine them in a way that all of your senses or most of your senses are invigorated. Sight, sound, um, sight, sound, smell in some cases. Um, then that is what images are made of. Images are made of things like sight, sound. So by combining all of those things, you would get a far more potent image in your mind. and especially because when I use words like beauteous, for example, like beauteous is such a great word because beautiful is a word that's not a bad word, but it's used quite a lot. But beauteous has a very poetic quality to it, a very lyrical quality to it that adds a pungent power to the sentence and paragraph, and so that's why I love that passage so much, and because it just gets all of the elements exactly right, to the point that it's very astounding, at least for me. And so that's a passage that I really enjoy. A dialogue passage that I really like is, which is also in the same chapter, is this passage where that goes, "Once upon a time, my heart was very much like yours. It was so pure, so unspoiled. It was like the first pencil of light on a spring morning. At first, you think the light will stay forever, but night must come, and with it the proliferation of stardust agonies. Eventually, you're left with the shadow of a memory that was only ever a dream." Now, I really like that passage. That might be my favorite line in terms of dialogue in Silent Reckoning, because you have this character who is mournful of the past because she can never get it back. All she has is the future, and time has passed her by. And in some instances, she realizes that perhaps the past was never really real to begin with. That perhaps her memories are being mixed with dreams, with things which never actually existed, but she thought existed. But in some cases, we can romanticize the past, and in fact, what we're romanticizing was only ever a dream. It wasn't real, and we tend to romanticize the past and not look to the future. So you have this character of Jeannie Anderson who is completely trapped in the past, and she's trying to reconcile that, but she can't, and that ultimately leads to tragedy down the road. And so that's another reason why I absolutely love that passage. So those are just a couple. There's a lot of passages that I like from my most recent work, but I don't have those on hand to read to you. But I will be reading them quite a lot once I get my book published, and even a little before. So those are just some of my favorite passages. Um, so does anyone else have anything they would like? Does anyone else have anything they would like to add or say in terms of questions? I would very much someday. I know no one's asked me this. Uh, when you do a lot of talking, your mouth can get dry. Um, no one's asked me this, but oh, do you have any other birthday wishes or any other writer plans for this year? Well, like I said, I'm going to be um, well, like I said, I'm going to be publishing my book, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, later this year. It's going to be a very epic book. If you want to know what it's about, it's if you combine it's like if you were to combine A Tale of Two Cities and Anna Karenina and kind of smash them together as one book, because it's about a woman who is the wife of this factory owner in this industrial town in the 19th century, and how she's very dissatisfied with her marriage, and ends up falling in love with this man who is a fat who works for her husband, and then there's this revolution brewing, and they get caught up in it, and there's this guy named Bertrand Shaw who's leading the revolution, but then towards the end, it gets out of control, and even he finds himself a victim of sorts because he realizes the logical conclusion of his own philosophy is flawed, and so that leads to many different revelations, and so that's what the book is about. I'm going to release that hopefully again in June or July, maybe maybe a little bit later. I don't know. It will come out this year sometime. I'm in the editing stage right now, trying to get because I wrote it in my notebook, so I'm trying to get it all down to the computer. I'm hoping to have a draft ready to post on Booksy by March, and it's going to be mainly because I will be getting a puppy come March 1st. You know, and March 1st is when the puppy arrives, and that's going to take up a lot of my time. So I'd like to have the rough edit done by that time, so I can go just so I can have the bulk of the editing done, and then just do make little tweaks prior to publication. Hopefully in June or July. Might not work out that way. I might still be working on it in March, in which case it might come out later in the year. But those are my plans. I'm probably not going to start any new projects. Yeah, I'm probably not gonna start any new projects until, later this year after maybe in the fall. Um, uh, your new book sounds very interesting. Well, again, it is interesting. If you wanna check out this book, which I've already published, is, Silent Reckoning. It's kind of like The Great Gatsby because it's about this woman, Jeannie Anderson, who 1929, who is a silent film actress, and she's basically looking to resurrect her career. And so she has this rival. There's this rival actress named Ursula Chapman, and there's this fan named Walter Peterson who's obsessed with Jeannie Anderson, and they have a kind of romance, and then he convinces Jeannie to try to frame Ursula Chapman to ruin her career, so Jeannie's career can ascend. And so they get involved with this critic who initially was against Jeannie Anderson and in favor of Ursula Chapman, but now he suddenly changed his mind, and that leads to a big revelation about Jeannie's past. And it's a very involving her and the critic, and it's a very tragic tale, similar to The Great Gatsby in some sense. And and Silent Reckoning is a very concise book in that way. It's a very it has a lot of it's probably my most concise work. Um, the Exit Ignominy is going to be more epic on scale, which could mean there are little there may be more mistakes that slip by me because it's so big that I can't be aware of them all. But it is going to be very grand and epic on scale, far more than anything that I've ever written. But I am very proud of Silent Reckoning as a book. Um, what is the angriest character you've ever wrote, or the most villainous? Well, the most villainous. Well, in the character that I'm currently in my current work, I mean the work that I'm getting ready to publish. There's this character named Desmond Archer who's an angry, almost what you might call a communist revolutionary, and he doesn't he only wants more power for himself, though he doesn't care about the communist cause per se, and therefore he will use and manipulate people. He will turn on other people who are on his side if they have even the slightest disagreement with him. He is very ideological in the sense that he can't see nuance really in anything. You're either with me or you're against me, and he does a lot of it. You know, if you're going to have an evil villainous character, I do think that you should have, because in so many stories you have characters where one character is very where the villain is very charismatic, very sophisticated, and then you have the hero who's kind of annoying and you almost and self-righteous and you almost want to see him die. Whereas I try to make it, not all of my villains are like this, but I try to make my villains do really horrible things, so you want to see them get their comeuppance. And sometimes they will, and other times good might lose because that's the way life is. Excuse me, I'm talking a whole lot, so sometimes good wins, sometimes evil wins. That's just life. Um, and although even in books that have pessimistic endings, I always try to say that there is hope for the future, because nothing is entirely bleak, even if it seems bleak at the time. So I wouldn't call myself a nihilistic writer by any means, but of course, there's also this character in one of my in one of my earlier works named Sheriff Parker, who was this really in the Reigns of Golden Valley, this really sadistic one note in some sense, I think perhaps two one note villain who was had a relationship with a 15-year-old girl and was abusing her, and the mother allowed it and continued, but continued it anyway because she wanted Sheriff Parker's influence, and he was a very despicable character. um, and then you have there's this character my most in Silent Reckoning you have the character of Rupert Miller, who again who is a very vicious critic who um who uses people, and he and Jeannie Anderson have a past that where even though he's trying to help with her career later on, they have a past that the reader and even the character of Walter Peterson are under. I can't reveal though what he did to Jeannie though because I can't. But that would spoil too much of the book if you haven't read it. Um, yes, I've written several despicable characters over the years. So so does anyone else have any questions for me? Any questions at all? It would be nice, and I'm not knocking anybody or criticizing anybody who hasn't. It would be nice though if some people, if I could have some of my followers who have actually read my book, so because I would like sometime, specific questions about because sometimes as a writer, and I don't mind it, but sometimes you can receive a lot of very kind of generic kind of writer questions like what's your process, which those are fine questions, I don't mind answering them, but sometimes questions where that are more specific like when this thing happened in your story, what did you mean, what did you what did you what did you mean by that? And then sometimes, I can give a more interesting answer than when it's just not that I mind generic writer questions. I would rather be asked generic writer questions than no questions at all. So I'm not complaining. Although I do think if someone is an interviewer, like I've seen interviewers, for example, I've seen where they only ask the writer generic writer questions. I do think if you're a professional interviewer, you do have an obligation to at least read some of a writer's work. Um, and so that can be frustrating with so-called writer interviewers. Um, um, I'm brand new, by the way. Well, yeah, I'm not knocking anybody, especially if you're brand new for not reading any of my work. It's fine. Um, it's perfectly all right. I'm not criticizing anybody or anything like that. You're under no obligation to read my joke books just because you follow my channel. There are other writers that I follow that I haven't read any of their books, so but I will say it's just I wish, at least some of my audience would sometime because because that it would create there would sometime perhaps be some more substantive questions because they would know more. But again, it's not a requirement. It's not necessary to have a good conversation, to have a good rapport. I'm not critiquing anybody. Um, so does anybody have any more questions for me in that regard? I was going to say something before I answer that question, but oh what does your daily writing schedule? I missed the question. What does your daily writing schedule look like? Are you more structured or chaotic with your schedule? Well, when I'm writing, yeah, um, when I'm writing, I tend to write around I tend to write around 2 to 3 hours. Quite often, it's in the afternoon. Sometimes, a lot of times, it might be between like 1 and 3, or 1 and 4, or between 1 and 5, something or somewhere in there. That's what I tend to be the most alert. I write in the woods quite often. Um, I absolutely love writing in the woods. I would probably be right now, even though it's kind of cold, if I were working on a book right now. But I just finished my book, so I'm kind of taking a break from writing because I don't I wrote again last year almost every day 2, 3 hours, for, um, for almost a whole year until December the 10th, which is when I finished, my, rough draft all I mean, not all day, but every day, and it can get a writing routine keeps you grounded in some sense because it makes it where you are, where you have a schedule where you can chip away at a book a little at a time. Whereas if you just have this philosophy where you're just going to write whenever, well, then you almost never write. So so a lot of times, if when I have a writing schedule, even if I don't feel like writing, I'll try to get some writing done anyway. Because if I don't, I know that I will never finish it. In fact, I probably need to have a schedule like that when it comes to editing. But I don't have a schedule like that. Therefore, my editing has been rather chaotic. I probably need to make an editing schedule. But I definitely have a writing schedule, and and so yes, I do have a writing schedule when I'm writing, and usually it's in the early afternoon. Sometimes it can change though, depending on there may be some days, some times where I become more of an early bird. A lot of times out in this involuntary necessity, so it might be earlier in the day. On average, I tend to write between 1 and 3 or 1 and 4. Sometimes if I'm a little behind, it might be between 2 and 4, 2 and 5, something like that. And I often write outside in a notebook because I live. And some of you might not know this. I live on when around 100. It's not quite that, but it's close somewhere in there. I'm just going to estimate um, around 100 acres of property. My family owns 100 acres of property, and so I will often go in the woods. And quite often, I go in this area that's going to be my property sometime that's around 2.5 acres, and I write there, and hopefully I will be deeded that property sometime this year, so it will be officially my property, and then I'll get to write on my property, and nobody can else can come on my property, and if a lot of times people like to hunt on my property, and I'll say no hunting on my property is where I write. You can't hunt on my property. And so I enjoy writing in the woods immensely, especially during autumn and because autumn is such a great time to write with all the vivid colors. Um, um, your upcoming books sound great. I'll check out your previous works. Well, I hope you do. I could use the support, definitely. Um, nice. Are you going to build a small house or something? I wish I could. I can't afford. The thing is that you can have land but have no capital to build anything on it. I would love to build a small house. That would be if someone gave me a yeah, if someone gave me several thousand dollars, a few $1,000s, I that's the first thing I would do would be to build, to be to would be to build a writing hut or someplace, a small house even where I could go and write and even relax and just get away. That's what I would. If someone gave me a few $1,000s, that's what I would do with it. But I don't have such money available to do that. That would be my dream, to do that. But, right as of now, I just have to I have a chair where I go out and write, and of course, if it rains, um, if it rains, I have to go inside, or if it's too cold, well, therefore, I would like to have a house, so if it starts raining or if it's too hot or too cold, I can still write there. Um, However, the downside is that from, like, April through, like, September, it's very difficult to ride outside because where I'm from, it's full of ticks. There are ticks, literally, everywhere, and so, and later in the summer, chiggers, and therefore, when I start hiking and riding, and even sometimes in March that can happen, and so, that's one of the reasons why I do not enjoy summer where I live, even though summer can be used as a great poetic device, but the reality of summer, summers where I'm from in Kentucky can be very humid, very hot, and so I only get to ride outside for around half of the year. The other half I can, and even of course sometimes even in December it can be too cold. My ideal temperature usually is between like is bet when it is between like 55 degrees and 70 degrees. That's my ideal temperature. Um, but I will write in 40-degree weather and even sometimes in 30-degree weather as long as it doesn't show go below 35. However, if it's above 80 or below 35, I usually don't write outside. Um, and when I write inside, I will often write right here at this desk, and or sometimes I'll write on the back porch outside. Um, have you ever thought about writing nonfiction? Hmm, yeah, I've thought about perhaps maybe someday when I'm a lot older, maybe writing a memoir or something, or writing some of my ideas about writing down. That's something I probably wouldn't want to do until I'm like maybe 70, like a long time in the future. Of course, memoirs can be and biographies can be very boring. Usually, they're only interesting if you have a writer who's had a very messed up life. You know, a writer has if you have a writer's had a relatively normal life, they're not that interesting. I've thought about, I've always wanted to write maybe several biographies about certain dead old Hollywood actors that I'm interested in. Um, I had an idea one time for a book where it was going to be like 10 relatively unknown old Hollywood stars, and then I would be like miniature biographies about them, and I would do a lot of research about each actor. These are actors from the 1920s, 30s, silent era, early sound films. That's something I've thought about at times. I will say though that a lot of what I have to say in terms of nonfiction, I put in fiction. So, for example, I have a lot to say about philosophy, for example, and about how I think that in order to have a proper ontological worldview, one's worldview has to be grounded in the transcendent, and that things like empiricism cannot justify themselves. They're not self-justifying empiricism and rationalism. And I have a scene, for example, in my most recent book where you have this philosopher, this materialist kind of philosopher, and this preacher, both of whom I disagree with to some degree as characters, but who they're in a debate about such discussions. And those are things that I would talk about if I were writing some kind of non-fiction philosophy book. But it's so much more entertaining to put it in a fiction book because then you have an epic and dramatic story around it. So you can I can write about some nonfiction things, but if you put it in the context of a fictional story, that makes it just more dramatic and more entertaining than if I were to write a purely nonfiction book. So thanks for that question. My grandfather about wrote a nonfiction book about the my Loxton the Amazing Family, and that took him like 20, 30 years to write. And he ended up he there's stories in it about how I knew about how I had an ancestor named Thomas Loxton, a direct ancestor who knew George Washington. Can be proven, by the way, given the fact that George Washington wrote about it in his diaries about meeting Thomas Loxton and Joseph Loxton, who I was named after. Joseph Loxton's not a direct descendant. He was the brother of William Loxton. William Loxton is the direct descendant. But Thomas is the father of Thomas Loxton is the descendant of William and Joseph. And Thomas thought, because they were trail guides for George Washington in Maryland, and he Washington wrote about how he thought that Thomas was very intelligent and how Joseph was very brave, a brave hunter tracker, all of that. I even had an ancestor, and that's in the book, who knew Abraham Lincoln, who was this. If court documents prove it, she was one of the descendants of Thomas. She was one of the daughters, maybe one of the, I forget. She's related to Thomas somehow. Descended of where she was the wife of a Revolutionary War veteran and a young Lincoln. this lawyer tried to take her pension away from her, and then so Lincoln represented and fought for her pension, and gave the guy who was trying to steal her pension a talking to in the courtroom. So and so yeah, I have ancestors who knew George Washington as well as Abraham Lincoln. It's not family legend either. It's proven, established a fact that they did. And so he wrote a nonfiction book about all of that. I actually wanted to become, when I first started to want to become a writer, it was primarily because of my grandfather and what he did and how he was interested in writing and reading all of that. Unfortunately, by the time that I was old enough where I could discuss a lot of those things with him, he got dementia the last 5 or 6 years of his life, and lost his ability to think and communicate. And my grandmother had to take care of him, and it was so horrible. The worst memory of my life come from that. And but yeah, so he wrote a nonfiction book. But again, if I write a nonfiction book, it would I I would prefer writing about historical things and philosophy in the context of fiction than just writing a pure nonfiction book. But I won't rule out the possibility that I will write a nonfiction book someday. So thanks for that question. Is anybody else? Well, transcendent meaning non-material things that don't exist. Materially things that exist in what you might call the spiritual realm, things that cannot be explained through pure material things. For example, like the laws of logic, mathematics, things that are assumed to be true but cannot be true through rational means. They have to exist outside of the material realm in the spiritual realm, because they cannot be self-justifying on the material realm. So they have to be rooted in something like God, for example, and or a divine cosmic intelligence. Yeah. Well, Schopenhauer said music would, yeah, well, he Schopenhauer felt a sense of transcendence, and I haven't read a great deal about Schopenhauer. What I believe, however, was is that it was just mainly just a feeling he had. It wasn't He couldn't actually ground it beyond just the feeling that he had about transcendence. He was referring to it in a kind of an emotional sense, whereas I'm referring to it as something that exists beyond the human mind, the beyond human thought. And as people will use that expression emotionally, I'm talking about things that are categories that exist outside of the material realm. And and again, those are things that one of the major themes in my book is this idea that people think that there can be a sense of morality or a sense of meaning without some kind of work in the transcendent, or without God as an anchor, for things like meaning, morality, or even something like logic, reason, and how when people try to live without that, their worldviews ultimately collapse and become self-refuting, contradictory, and that's something that I deal with quite a lot in my works. Um, and so let me see if I can find while you're asking questions here some more passages that I like. I really like this passage, for example, that's in my book, uh, Silent Reckoning, uh, which is the opening passage, the Silent Reckoning, which goes, before I was even a whisper in my mother's thoughts, it seemed as if the world had already forgotten me. I was born on August 25th, 1893. The world was completely different then. I still recall the echoes of the horses in the streets, the gallant way in which they trotted along the pavements. The air was clean, almost unnaturally so, and there seemed to be a radiant innocence to almost everything. The clouds in the sky, possibly in response to the purities in our hearts, were enchantingly serene. On and on the days shimmered, never once beholden to the shadows of midnight. All day long I heard soft piano music. The sunlight orchestrated the euphoric melodies, intensifying their auspicious cadences. There was no pain, there was no heartbreak. whatever darkness existed, whatever melancholy drifted through my frivolous gestures, was ultimately drowned out by the hymns of morning. Now, I personally really love that passage because, again, it uses characteristics of music like was drowned out by the hymns of morning, to make it to provide a more vivid and compelling image. This idea that the morning itself is like music, and that in some instances that watching the sun rise, seeing the morning can be equivalent emotionally to hearing a beautiful or compelling song, and in that it touches the narrator on that level. And so that's a passage that I really love because nature, in so many ways, the beauty of nature is like music, that we feel the same sense of euphoria when listening to example to the whispers in the wind. Uh, we feel that same euphoria when we listen to music, and so what you can combine, when you're describing images, the pleasure, the pleasure you get listening to the music, and the pleasure you get listening to nature or seeing nature. You can combine those two revelries, and you can put them together, and that creates a far more powerful and potent emotional state. And that's what writing is all about. It's taking about various forms of beauty and combining it in such a way that you're creating something entirely original and entirely new. Yeah, I'm new to your channel, but I just bought Mournful Wanderer. Look forward to reading it. Well, yeah, I hope you enjoy it. I will say that my best work is probably that's currently available. That is Silent Reckoning. I would say that reflects, me at my best. Mournful Wanderer is still probably, of the works that are currently available, my second favorite. Um, it is it's very condensed. There's really only 2 characters in Mournful Wanderer. I mean, there's a 3rd character, but it's hardly a character. But it's a very, it's very condensed in terms of its plot line. It's kinda like The Fall of the House of Usher in many ways, and, in the sense that you have these characters who are, not trapped, but confined in this small house, this small space, slowly going mad together. It's probably my greatest example of a gothic novel, novella, that is. Um, and So yeah, I enjoy Mournful Wanderer very much. I would say Silent Reckoning is probably at this point, my best work that's currently available. But Mournful Wanderer is still um, is still pretty good. But again, what I was saying about how so many pleasures in life we think are separate in terms of listening to music or seeing a sunrise, but they're actually the same in many ways. And combining those two emotional states, you do feel a sense of the transcendent. But when I say transcendent, I don't just mean feeling a sense of awe. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you feel a sense that these things, such a thing as beauty, must be rooted in something transcendent, like the spiritual realm or a creator, and that it has to be rooted in that, because otherwise you're dealing with something that is frankly an illusion, something that's rooted in the material, that's was made purely for survival purposes and nothing else. And I don't think beauty has real meaning unless it is rooted in something spiritual and something transcendent. If it's rooted purely in survival, then I think that, oh well, we believe in beauty because you can find some kind of mate. Then I think that is to reduce beauty to a pure animalistic quality, and I don't think that can truly explain beauty in that sense. And so yeah, um, d- d- does anyone have any more questions for me? Any questions at all? Oh, my main critique of Bukowski is it his grotesqueness. Um, and I don't know if you saw my video about that where I said that Bukowski was kind of grotesque. Um, Bukowski. My problem with Bukowski, I don't think he would be nearly as famous if he hadn't been a cynical, kind of drunk writer. Um, I think that I think that I think that his personality was greater than his talent in many ways. I haven't read, him extensively, so I don't want to make like a sweeping judgment because if I read him extensively, it's possible I might change my mind. So I don't want to seem like I've made a final pronouncement on Bukowski. But yes, I don't find his grotesqueness very appealing. I think it's beneath what a poet should be and do. Um, yeah, yeah, it is very late in Central Europe. I believe you live in. You said you lived in Ireland. You said you lived in Ireland. I don't know if you live in Ireland, but maybe you. The But yeah, I understand the difference in time zones and all of that. You don't have to stay. Have you ever been to New Orleans? No, I haven't been to New Orleans. I've been in terms of like the deep South. I've been to Alabama. Just went through. Oh, so you're Irish, but you live in Poland. Oh, so yeah, I've always wanted to visit Poland sometime, or and because it has a very rich history, a very very beautiful landscape. But yeah, so yeah, thanks for listening. Have you been to New Orleans? No, I've been in terms of the deep South to Alabama. I just went through Alabama a few months ago. I went been to Texas and all of and places of Florida. I've never been to New Orleans. I know you're from New Orleans, I believe, and and you've said several times that you're from New Orleans, and but New Orleans is a very rich town in terms of its history, related to writing and all of that. It has a lot of um, historical landmarks, places where from the old South and all of that. It's where Tennessee Williams was not from New Orleans, but he had I know quite a bit about New Orleans, even though I've never been there. I would like to go sometime, but he had a house there or an apartment where he wrote a streetcar named Desire. Streetcar named Desire, of course, took place in New Orleans. With and you had yeah, yeah. Again, they're okay. You're from the Virgin Islands. Okay, so but you live in the Virgin. But yes, there's a very colorful and unique writing scene there. Yeah, and you have a Tennessee who wrote a streetcar named Desire there, and with Vivian Lee, and then you have and well, that was she was in the film with and yeah, it has a very rich writing history. You have some of Tennessee Williams plays where it's really hot there, and then which kind of causes the characters to go a bit irate. Yes, Anne Rice was yeah, yeah. Interview with the Vampire was sit there, where you would have which very underrated movie, the original, where you have where I haven't read the book, but I've seen the movie where I've heard, from what I have read, I did try to read a bit of it once. It was very much like the movie, where you have Tom Cruise turns Brad Pitt into a. It's the only movie where I like the where I thought Tom Cruise was a good actor. It was where Tom Cruise gave a good performance as an actor, a good sinister performance. I wish he did more roles like that. A lot of times he just plays genetic action hero, which is fine for the kind of films that he makes, but they're not very demanding. And but he was yeah, you know, he was but yeah, he was very good in that movie. Of course, you have Louis, played by Brad Pitt, who just whined, like he said in the film, just whining Louis. And you have Brad Pitt, who is very dull in the film. Of course, Louis is a very dull character, but yeah, it's been a while since I've seen Interview with the Vampire, but it's a very atmospheric film in its own right. I saw that Haunted Mansion movie recently, which was set in New Orleans. The Which was, I had mixed feelings about the film itself, but it was set there. And but yeah, it has a very rich history. Would very much like the movie Live and Let Die with Roger Moore was set in New Orleans. I yeah, I would very much like to visit one day, but I haven't been. Um, so it seems like there's only one person remaining. So I will just ask, does anybody have any more questions? If not, I'll wrap things up. Um, so if Christina, if you're still here, you can ask me another question. Or oh, now there's two more people. Okay, well, now there's two more people. Okay, how many pages do you average per novel? Pages is very difficult because pages that can vary a lot depending on the on what kind of book, the size of the book, and like Silent Reckoning is about 250 pages, but and then you have a lot of my books are novellas. That there a lot of them are like Silent Reckoning. I would consider to be a full length novel, even though just barely. But the book I'm working on now, it will definitely be a full length novel, the biggest novel I've ever written. Um, but like Silent Reckoning is around 38,000 words. So it's full length novel, but just barely. And then you have, but again, The Great Gatsby was only around 40,000 words, and it's similar. The Silent Reckoning is similar to that. And then you have, and then you have Mournful Wanderer, which is around 20,000 words. And so a lot of my books are novellas. And again, page count can vary though, depending on the size of the book and all of that. I suspect that the book I'm currently writing now will be around 300, 400 pages. So it really just depends. Okay, so does anyone have any more questions for me? Again, probably my okay, so because I probably won't do. Okay, how do you feel about short form fiction and a short story? Well, there was a time where I wrote over 200 short stories. I actually have a short story collection called Dark Tales of Mystery and Crime. Um, and so, but I wrote quite a lot of short stories, quite a lot of fan fiction, and at one time, and that kind of prepared me for longer works. I would like to return to short story writing sometime because with a short story, you can write a short story and and if you mess it up, you can always go back and I mean it's not the end of the world. If you mess a novel up, that's a much bigger deal. And so yeah, I started with short stories. I would very much like to get back to writing them. When I tried to write uh, The Ecstasy and the Ignominy, however, it started as a short story, but then it bloomed into something much bigger. And so I would like to get back to writing more concise things, but before I start something big, whether though that will be a series of short stories or a novella, I don't know. But yeah, there was a time where I wrote, sometimes two or three short stories a week between 2014 and 2016. I did that all the time, and but yes, I would definitely like to return to the short story because it's something. A short story, it gives you they reward you quickly because it may only take a week or a month at most to write one, and so you get a lot of reward from writing a short story. Whereas a novel, you have to play the long game in order to enjoy it. And so yeah, yes, I love short stories. I started with short stories. Started short stories in terms of reading, and I would love to get back to it. I might like to like I wrote two short stories between Silent Reckoning and the Ecstasy and Ignominy. I don't know what to do with them because they're not enough to make into to put into a collection. So I would like to write more and maybe release another collection sometime. Whether I will can do that between Ecstasy and Ignominy, my next long work, or whether I'll do that somewhere down the road, I don't know. So thanks for that question. So does anyone else have any questions? I will say though, I wanted to talk about one thing. One thing though, one of the things I wanted to read before I wanted to read this passage and then comment on it as long as some people are here. Where it goes, yes, I'll be definitely checking out your work when I get a chance. Well, thank you. I hope you do. I appreciate that. Walter Peterson dreamt Walter Peterson dreamt of Jeannie long before he ever laid eyes upon her. During twilight, often while clenching the sheets that enveloped his quivering body, he visualized her scarlet lips, her porcelain complexion. But it was not until he visited the Umbracious movie house, an establishment often referred to as the Palace, that he truly witnessed the zenith of her immaculate sensuality. As the curtain parted from the dust-covered screen, pigments of luminous light seized the auditorium, as if eager to exhibit the maximum potency of the moving image. Although the images were unaccompanied by sound, their visceral splendor more than compensated. A glistening pasture materialized on the screen, its wavering hills evoking sentiments of elemental serenity. Following several intervals of blissful stagnation, the figure of a woman manifested on the screen, her features obscured by the vibrancy of the projector. As the light succumbed to the sweltering darkness, the refined lineaments that encompassed her visage became distinguishable. Her physiognomy encapsulated the radiance of youthful auroras, the luminosity of midnight moons, and the resplendent fervor of sultry twilights. Now, what I really like about this passage is that, like resplendent, for example, is one of my favorite words because it goes beyond just describing someone as being pretty or beautiful. Resplendent is to have a refined looking quality, a quality that is refined yet radiant at the same time. Resplendent. It's a word that I really love because sometimes you can get words like resplendent that mean and can describe multiple things at the same time. It goes beyond just beautiful. It's beautiful, refined, and radiant at the same time. So words like that are very powerful. Now, sometimes simpler words can do the job better. Sometimes a word like beautiful, beauty, like saying that her beauty glowed in the glowed in the moonlight. Sometimes that can be just as effective, but it depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes simplistic words are better. Other times you want a word that has multiple layers to it. It all depends on what you're trying to do specifically with the passage. Oh, all right. Does anyone else have any questions for me, either about the passages that I've been reading, or about what I've said about writing, or about my writing or reading, or anything like that? Um, what did you create fan fiction of? Fan fiction of. When did I say I created fan fiction? I don't remember. Did I say that? I don't recall if I said I've never written fan fiction. I don't think. Um, No, I don't think I've ever written any fan fiction. I don't know exactly I don't know exactly what you're referring to. Maybe I'm lost here, maybe the mistake is mine, but I don't, oh, okay, no, I know, I've never written any fan fiction at all. I would say I one time, I thought about writing a fan fiction story about, I never wrote it about, A Christmas Carol where you have where is an alternate version where you have, Bob Cratchit and his nephew Fred try to convince drug Ebenezer Scrooge and fake the whole thing with the ghost to make it, um, and fake the whole thing with the ghost to make him give them more money and become generous, and that it's a whole scam that no ghost actually, haunted him. I thought about writing it. That's, that's a fan fiction that, I know I don't think I've never written any fan fiction. I don't think I've ever said that, so no, um, my sister writes a lot of fan fiction. Um, she writes, these, stories about Asian fan fiction. I don't really understand it myself, um, and, I would say that I even have some problems, with some of the things that she writes in terms of subject matter, but, but that's her business. But anyway, but anyway, just dropping by to say, to say, happy, birthday, Joseph. Well, thank you. I'm glad you, again, I have this birthday live stream, almost every year, and, so, mainly because, it just became kind of of a tradition. I will definitely host another live stream, when my book, comes out. I'm kind of feel sorry that Miles Knight didn't make it tonight. I thought he's usually, I haven't heard from him all month though. I don't know what's, happened to him. I'll have to check up on him in the next few weeks if I don't hear anything from him. And so thank you for wishing me a happy birthday. Um, so does anyone else have any questions for me? Any questions at all? We've been Yeah, thank you. Turned 29 foot. Well, it's not actually my birthday, by the way. It happened my birthday was 5 days ago, but January 23rd. But but there is cake. We do have cake here tonight. I might go have those, but no, but I always have this live stream usually a few days after my birthday. My actual birthday is just January 23rd. My 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 father was born on January 23rd, 1955. I was born January 23rd, 1995. Um, one thing I want to point out is that the fact that I shaved right before I decided to do this video. A lot of times I don't look very good after after I shave. Usually after about a week or two is when I start to look better again. But I shaved because my hair was growing just too long, and so anyway, so does anyone else have any questions? Though I thought I thought I had placed hold on, I was this book I was going to show people. Um, um, I've been rereading a little bit of Moby Dick, which is I don't know if you can see Moby Dick, which is one of my favorite novels. Which I'm planning on. Well, I might be going to Moby Dick's home on this museum on a tour in the autumn of 2025. That's something I'm very looking forward to. Hopefully, the museum is still open then. I'm very I love authors, Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm going to be going to some of those historic locations, hopefully on a vacation in 2025. Um, how do you feel approaching the age of Jesus when he first started his ministry? Like, how do you feel approaching the age of you mean like what age Jesus was? Um, I believe, depends on when you think he was born. He started his ministry around 3 years before his death. Um, I know some scholars think he was crucified in 30 AD. Others say 33 AD. Oh, 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 you're about to be 30. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Now I get it. Okay. Oh, how do you feel approaching the age of Jesus was? Yeah, well, Jesus was about depending on yeah, he was around 30, maybe a little bit. It depends on the exact age. Some people think he might have been born around 4 BC. You know, it's hard to think. Yeah, he was in his late 20s, early 30s, basically. Um, but yeah, well, like yeah, yes, time definitely flies by. Jesus, though, you know, if you go by historical accounts, probably looked like he was around 40. You know, for is it because he lived in such a rough environment, even though he was around 30 when he started his ministry. He would have appeared a lot older. Um, and especially if you go by something like the Shroud of Turin. Um, yeah, 29 though. Yeah, you know, when you're 29, you might as well be 30. You know, in many ways, because because you just think about all year, I'm going to turn 30, I'm going to turn 30, and then when you turn 30, that's when people stop taking you seriously. I mean, not stop taking when people say get your act together, you're old now. Is this 30 is some arbitrary age where you suddenly turn old? Of like, no, that's not the case. Again, I don't worry about the fact. I mean, my worry is not getting older in and of itself, as long as I mean, I do worry about, you know, ill health, of course, as you get older. That's something that's always a worry. But it's mainly because I fear that I there may come a time where I always have a fear that I'll end up, you know, a broke writer alone with no one. That's always something that I've feared, you know, for many years. However, I will say though that working a dead end corporate job in order to provide for people who don't really understand me and don't care about me, that would be far worse. So in many ways, it's choosing the lesser of two evils. Hmm. So does anyone else have any questions for me? I'm very steep, by the way, in Jesus's ministry, learning about the historicity of Jesus. Oh, being broke is tempting for a writer because it feels so poetically authentic. I'm not one of those people though who thinks that a writer needs to be broke in order to produce good work. I especially don't understand writers who would deliberately choose poverty because they think it's going to provide good work. It doesn't, not at all. Um, Being broke as a writer just gives you more anxiety, and that can actually hinder one's work at the end of the day, not help it. And no, that's just a stereotype that someone has to be poor or starving, you know, in order to create great work. That's an absolute myth. Um, um, so, does anyone else have any questions for me? Looks like there's only one person left at this point. I mean, I think might be you, Kevin. I don't know. Well, yeah, overabundance can definitely overabundance can definitely spoil a writer. Probably spoil someone like Stephen King. But at the same time, though, if one in order to be happy, one has to have enough money that they can pay the bills, live comfortably, like I would like to have art enough that I can build a writing hut and write out of it. I don't think that would be overabundance. That would help my writing. But the overabundance can definitely spoil a writer, not ground them. For example, Charles Dickens, who became so successful that he thought he could get away with anything because he was Charles Dickens, and I'm talking morally. But 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 yeah, but I do think though that a writer should have enough money that they can be comfortable, and so they can focus on writing without having to worry about working a dead end corporate job or paying the bill or and paying the bills. So but those are two extremes. It's best to be somewhere in the middle. And so does anyone else have any questions for me of any kind, of any depth? Um, this is a pretty good live stream. It went better than I thought it would go. Um, so there's only one person left. So I guess, Kevin, if you have any final questions for me, you can ask it. And if not, we'll wrap this up. I may have a live stream sometime next month, maybe not. I'll definitely have a live stream again when my book comes out. And so I'll give you or anyone else the last opportunity to ask me anything. Thanks for live streaming. I had a blast. Well, thank you. I know you're new here. I know you're new. You can. I have again. I've posted nearly 1,000 videos. It's kind of frustrating because YouTube algorithm doesn't seem to promote a lot of my videos. You found me through the suicide. Oh, I shouldn't. It's dangerous to say that on YouTube, but you found me from that video. I did. Didn't you? The one about why do writers commit a certain word. Yeah, a lot of my cynical writer, yeah, a lot of my cynical writer videos. That series has been discontinued because it's for the time being because it's very difficult to make in terms of editing until after I publish my. Now I just publish and make videos on my phone. Those videos get promoted a bit more because I guess they have images of things, but videos I make on my phone, which most of my YouTube videos on that hardly or rarely get any views at all. It's like the algorithm. It's not that I get low views. It's like the algorithm doesn't even know I exist, even though I posted nearly 1,000 videos. So that can be kind of frustrating. That's why I use YouTube to have more in-depth conversations with people. I use um, I use TikTok up more for viewers for viewership, and that's how I split the difference. So if you have any, so I guess you've said your goodbye. So if you don't have a final question, if you have a final question, fine, you can ask it. If not, I'll wait about 30 seconds, then I'll do the stream. I've been watching all of your shorts and your linger videos, and your linger videos on card rooms gets me thinking. I don't know exactly what you mean. I've been watching all of your shorts and your linger on card rooms. I don't get me thinking. Oh, oh, yeah. Well, I make longer content. Now and then, but the trouble is though is that because I make videos for TikTok and for YouTube, and so and TikTok allows videos up to 10 minutes, and so I will post my videos. Yeah, well, that's fine. It's perfectly okay. Um, um, And when I'm on a live stream, on someone else's live stream, and I type things, I'm constantly in fear that I will make some kind of typo. You know, I'm constantly in fear that I will make some kind of typo, and the person will read it on air and be embarrassed. So don't feel embarrassed if you made some kind of typo. I know it happens to all people. You know, it happens to me at times too. So don't feel embarrassed at all. And And so yeah, that's a great idea. That it's great if you check out my TikToks. So so thanks for participating. You did really well participating here. I guess this has been a pretty good birthday live stream. Again, I'll probably do another I'll do another live stream when my book comes out. Definitely, I'll hold up the book cover and talk about it. And I may make another do another again. I will be getting a puppy in March, and so and puppies can take up a lot of your time. So that's why might not do another live stream for a while. It just depends. Who knows? I may change my mind and do one. So yeah. So thanks for participating, and I guess I will end the live stream now. So this has been a fairly good live stream. So I'll see all of you next time.